Okay, now we come to, I know, one of your favorite philosophers, Tom, and one who's had some influence on your thinking, and one who I still don't get. So maybe we'll have an interesting dialogue about Søren Kierkegaard, which means church garden in Danish, something you may not have known. And his book, and certainly a seminal book in all of theology, if not philosophy, Fear and Trembling, the book in which he famously posits the leap of faith. Can you give us some background of what the book is and the examples that he uses in which you make a leap of faith, and what that means about reason and ethics?
Kierkegaard was very big on choosing the most extreme example. He was an example of a philosopher who really put himself to the test in the sort of dialogical way that you were saying. He called it dialectical, but it was the same thing. He would pick out for himself the most extreme instance and then try to work with that. And so he said, well, let's take the case of Abraham and Isaac in the Bible. You'll remember that Abraham was promised a son. He gets to be 70 years old. Sarah is 70 years old. He still doesn't have a son. And not only did God promise him a son, but this son is going to be, through this son, Abraham is going to be a blessing to all the nations. His progeny are going to change world history. Okay? And so 70 years old, no son, and then finally Sarah gets pregnant. And they can't believe it. It's a miracle. They have the son. This son is Isaac. So Abraham feels about this son even more deeply than the typical father feels about the typical son, because this son comes with a lot of loading for him.
Yes.
So now he's got the son. The son grows up to be a young man, and God says, okay, it's time for you to sacrifice him. And he means literally on an altar like a sheep or a goat. With a knife. With a knife. Lay Isaac out and kill him. And the reason why God is asking Abraham to do this awful, awful thing, is he's testing Abraham's faith.
Yeah, already I don't like God, but
okay.
Don't let me interrupt you.
And Kierkegaard, being as dialectical as he is, would say, you're absolutely right. You shouldn't like him. Okay? Now, in fact, that's kind of Kierkegaard's point. Kierkegaard says that the reason that Abraham does this isn't for any ethical reason that you or I could ever dream up. You know, by all ethical standards, this behavior is crazy.
Okay, give a name to that, disregarding the ethical.
Yep. He called what Abraham does teleological, very fancy word, teleological suspension of the ethical. And by that he meant he's transcending the ethical realm into a higher telos, higher goal. Mm-hmm. Okay, he has a higher goal in mind. Okay? And by all reasonable standard, by all ethical standard, by all standards of reason, this is nuts. Okay? But he does it because he trusts God. He trusts him. Trusts him to do what? Intervene at the last moment, which in fact is what God does? No, he doesn't know what he trusts him. Mm-hmm. You know, trust him to bring back Isaac from the dead? Don't know. We don't know. He doesn't know. All he knows is he trusts him. Okay? And so he says that for the real truths like that, the truths of our very being, the truths that we would stake our lives on, they're not rational or irrational. They're beyond that. You stake your life on what you trust. And you could never give a list of reasons. I could never give a list of reasons to you of what I trust, and you would look at them and say, oh, yeah, those are very reasonable. I accept them. You couldn't do that. You either trust what I trust or you don't. And that's what he's saying. And he said, so truth, now he didn't say, there were not rational truths. There certainly were. But what he said is for the really biggies, what I'm going to bet my life on, those aren't rational or irrational. There's something beyond that. They're based on fundamental trust, a leap of faith, he called it.
Yeah, and I kind of get it. And maybe it's because I can't quite leave the immanent sphere, especially when it comes to ethics. But it seems to me that Kierkegaard's take on the Abraham story, which has always distressed me, it's read every year in the High Holy Days in Jewish religion, and I always cringe at it. And there are always the little old ladies who say, oh, he means he's not really going to kill him. They know that. They have this kind of winking relationship, God and Abraham. I don't buy that. I just can't make that leap. I just can't do that. I'm too much of a humanist.
Yeah. And Kierkegaard would not argue with any of that. Kierkegaard would say, all that tells you is what an infinite risk it is. You know?
Yeah, I knew that already, Kier.
But you can't escape it, because we all have to do that. That's what he says.
Okay. Well, that's a point well taken.
Yeah.
And why should we read this before we die? Probably just as we're dying is a good idea, because didn't he have a lot to say about our perception of death in Fear and Trembling?
Yeah, he sure did, and elsewhere. Part of why we read him is he was very influential on all the existentialist philosophers after him. Mm-hmm. You know, and
Camus and Sartre and Paul
Heidegger, Paul Tillich, Nietzsche. And what they all say is that the alternative to the risk of staking your life on whatever, the alternative to that is everydayness. It's just, you know, going about your business, trying not to think about death. And all these guys say, no, you want to take on the anxiety. You want to take it on. You want to get to that abyss that you were saying none of us really wants to go to, and that's right. In one sense, we don't. But they're all saying, unless you go to that abyss, and unless you say, this is an infinite risk I'm taking, or this may be the real McCoy, I'm going to have to take that risk, because the only alternative to that is going half asleep.
Mm-hmm. I'll take that, thank you.
Most of the time I would say. Most of the time anybody would.
Yeah. Okay, I think those are our 4, huh? That'll keep you busy.